And welcome to everybody online. As you can see on screen, I do have a couple of hats in the company, but I'm one of the founders of myVR, who are turning 20 years this year. So we've been in this space and done probably all the mistakes and errors that's possible to do, helping driving extended reality going forward. To set the stage a bit about where Hexagon is working at the moment, we're going to spend a little bit on video, just an introduction, because Hexagon is one of those companies which is involved around a lot of things, but not being really known. As an example, 85 to 90% of all smartphones, cars, medical implants, airplanes manufactured last year was touched with technology from Hexagon. So we do have a fairly wide reach in a number of areas.
Hexagon is a digital reality solutions company, unleashing the power of autonomy to measure and improve what industry needs most. Productivity, efficiency, quality, lower cost, less waste. We believe that industry can save our world, that it can be the solution instead of the problem, and that global commerce is the path to a sustainable planet. Hexagon is intent on making this a reality by putting data to work autonomously to measure progress and improve outcomes. Our technologies digitally capture and measure all things in all places. They position, track, and navigate anything. They dimensionally design whatever you want to create, from facilities to evacuation plans. Simulate billions of real-world scenarios. Deliver location intelligence about anything, anywhere. Together, these technologies fuse the physical world with the digital. They empower us to make that giant leap beyond automation to autonomous. Because autonomy is data doing its best work. Yes, it will drive our cars, yet it will do so much more. It will carefully protect our citizens and nations, operate complex assets and facilities reliably, accurately construct buildings and infrastructure, manufacture products and goods intelligently, responsibly produce from our mines to our farms. Data will do all of these things autonomously. When industry embraces this, sustainable outcomes will follow. Hexagon, empowering an autonomous future.
So what does that actually mean when we start looking at this from an extended reality perspective? One thing is for sure that a lot of people seem to miss that for valuable XR workflows to exist, the digital twin has to be created as well as connected to the real world. And this is where our strength is at the moment, because we are among the biggest players when it comes to both doing the reality capture and the positioning in the professional sector. One of the reasons we are not probably known that much is that we do not do anything in the consumer space. Hence, all what I'm going to be talking about today is about the professional world and how we are looking at bridging the two things, become capturing the real world and putting up the digital twin with the design simulation and intelligence. If you look at how we position, or I'll say the big hype that's been over the last 2-3 years, the metaverse, or as we call it, the smart digital reality, or can also be named the industrial metaverse, we do a lot of things here. So the two worlds is what we create one reality. And this is where we see the most important thing that we can do is making sure that we actually can get the data to use. Because today we see the challenge that we see is that we capture so much data, but still so little is actually being used. So we think that a lot of workflows that we can start looking at and driving will close that gap between what is captured and what is actually being used by putting the data to work, as we also talked a bit about in the video. But when we are looking at things, is that there are also extended reality and smart digital reality actually exists at every scale that we can think of. And if you're looking at a lot of the research that are ongoing is, for instance, the way people engage with brands and companies and solutions. It seems like when we go into AR, that is much, much higher than without. So 50% increase, for instance, for consumers to recall the brands that engage them with immersive technologies. And that's massive. So for us, that's a quite interesting element and way of looking at things forward. But it doesn't come by itself. So when we are looking at how do we work in terms of identifying valuable XR workflows, we have some interesting elements at the moment. Generation Z is coming into the workforce these days. And that is the first truly digital native generation, because they have grown up without knowing internet at all. And the amount of people, it's 2.47 billion people, almost a third of the Earth's population is coming into the workforce these days. And when we're looking at the circle you see here is the areas where we are working with in the professional space. But if you're looking to both on the production ecosystems and what we call people ecosystems, we have more or less the same challenge going forward. An aging workforce is really not going to be replaced by the Generation Z. So, for instance, in the US, I'll say these figures are 5 years old, but that means that there's even more. But 25% of the workforce in the US in manufacturing was 55 years or older. That means a massive retirement is going forward. So the question is, how do we capture these things, and how do we provide solutions and the products and workflows that connect with Generation Z? I'm as far away from Generation Z as you can kind of imagine, but I'm still very much focused on how we can drive these elements going forward. If we look into especially the utility sector, where we are doing quite a lot, we have some, I would say, rather scary figures, because the people that know, as you know, in the old days, you paid the television repairman, he came and kicked the TV on the right place and you paid for it. And these kind of people has been working on industrial plants and utility sector. They know what goes wrong. They can listen to things that just go over and kick it with a hammer. You don't pay for the hammer, but you pay for the knowledge to know where to kick the hammer. So these kind of things are really important going forward, also for us to try to capture that knowledge and drive that forward. But as I said, back to the Generation Z, how do we connect with these kind of things? And for us, working with the workflows or try to identify what makes sense is a few basic questions which we have put together, and what we are looking at and have as a guideline is where does it make sense? What needs to change? Do we have the data or not? Interestingly enough, in some situations, we find that we have way too much data, so we really don't know how to get that. But the big question is, how do we use it? And does it help in terms of driving the autonomous ecosystems, which is continuously evolving? If you look at valuable XR workflows, we've been doing a number of very interesting prototypes over the time for trying to highlight and figure out what really makes sense. One quite interesting we did back in 16 was to look at what's called lockout, tagout workflows in industrial facilities. Some of the, on every larger processing plant that has anything to petrochemical or chemical process plants, there's always people that get hurt by doing things the wrong way. So, for instance, when you're shutting down a section of it, do you do the right one to avoid high pressure, wrong fluids coming out, or all these kind of things? But the challenge we found, as we then were working together with Daiquiri, was also that when you get really near field AR, you actually have a lot of drift problems. And if you have a multiple things that look almost the same, you really don't know which one you're looking at. So you actually had to add a number of other elements going forward. In the later years, we built a number of big AR experiences for expos to do the storytelling on complex workflows. And this has been very well received in the market. And for those of you that were in Vegas now 2 weeks ago for the ConExpo, the largest construction exhibition in the world, you got the chance to see this one that was also at Bauma in Germany in October, where you actually had more than 4 million visitors at the show that week. So there's a number of things here which we are testing and driving through the prototypes. But how do we get that going forward to become a product? That's an interesting thing. If you're looking at how we see the status of XR of today, is that we are, for devices, we are starting to get there. But there's still challenges with the HMDs and other AR variants, such as, for instance, the modular contact lenses, where they've done a 360 these days. Stop that part because the funding is a challenge. Cost of HoloLens, for instance, is also something that is, these type of devices are basically too expensive, I would say, for a mass deployment. So we have shifted our focus to work more on devices that already exist in the hands of our customers, such as the smartphones and the tablets, as these can drive the change now, because we need this going forward. So that's why we say partially it's there. For POCs, it's okay. When it comes to sensing and understanding the environment, a lot of the devices are there and solutions for creating relocalization services in terms of capturing, creating, and deploying that as a service is one of the building blocks that we see. It's there, but it needs to be simplified. I've done a number of investments in this area, but we don't invest in the user devices like tablets and smartphones, etc. But we are involved in making them, as I mentioned in the beginning. If you're looking at rescanning a site, for instance, with consumer devices for various type of workflows, there's a lot of progress tracking solutions that are working in this end, but it's still, we see that they're missing the simple 3D-based deployable solution that can automatically do change detections. There's a lot of interesting POCs, but that's what we say partially. HMDs, same goes here. Now that Microsoft have kind of set the bar for how the UI UX should be with HoloLens 2, which offers great capabilities for industrial POCs, but we say it's not yet there for mass deployment. 5, this is probably the area where we have come furthest, especially on the software side, where you have elements such as digital guided workflows, remote inspections, assistance, and training. But both when it comes to the hardware and the actual solutions, there's still a lot to do. Many are actually building collaborative add-on components to platforms like Microsoft Teams, and that includes also Hexagon with our Nexus platform for the world of manufacturing. So if you are in Hannover on the Hannover Messe, stop by the Hexagon booth, you actually get to try out some of that stuff. This is an area which we think a lot of the industry has really missed out, and that is connecting the IoT world to the XR workflows. And this is because when we're looking at brownfield installations, the modification process is really slow. And for greenfields, it's also difficult in many of the projects for us to see that they have taken any changes ongoing to really adapt and think of XR in terms of where we need to change the workflows going forward. Even though that we've been talking about the Industry 4.0 and spatial Web 3 for a very long time, it seems, but not long enough. Interesting look at Mobile World Congress now in Barcelona last month. The telco business was really starting to push 6G as the savior. But so I'll leave this one a bit open. But I think for all of us on the call, and here is that we are the one that they need to convince a lot more people moving forward, and also have the focus of where the valuable XR workflows are. If you're looking at what we have, the building blocks that we have identified as important ones, and there are more, but these are the main areas where we at the moment are working on in terms of making sure that we have all the components that's needed to really to put together the various workflows and to support smart digital reality, metaverse, or whatever with all these components. So how do we identify workflows? I have to say, we have been a lot of the enthusiastic approach. It's where we test a lot of cool hardware. So we have, oh shit, I must have this thing. We build the POCs. We convince someone to try this out. If they don't hook on it, then we go to the next one. So if we get a yes, now this is really cool, we would like to do something, I'm happy. What about the adoption and the ROI? We really don't see that. But what the current approach, and that got us to change the whole thing, is a bit different. And this is what we see at the moment. We have in divisions in Hexagon put together cross-functional teams where you have the people from all the different sides of product development, product ownership, marketing, customers. So we are looking and going through the product portfolios to see what can be AR enabled or XR enabled, what should not. And then when we have that overview, we go into start really digging into the workflow identification to see what is actually need to change. We then do rounds of user interviews to validate the thinking or not. Then we go back to the design and testing. Start doing testing. And then also looking at various hardware and software evaluations on the components, other things that needs to bring in to be developed to make a good solution which we can do the development on, then do the deploy and training, and then we get real ROI evaluation to see, did this make sense? And the more times we do that process, the better we know the ROI kind of, I was like, thinking from the beginning. So to give you some ideas on some of the values that we do create, we see a lot on top management is driven by cost reduction. And what does that actually mean? So to give a little interesting idea what that can be, this is, some people have probably seen GNSS or high accuracy GPS antennas connected to iPhones or iPads or other tablets. But here we are looking at a GNSS antenna with RTK connections that gives us roughly 2 centimeters accuracy X, Y, Z. So if you think of this one where the surveyor is going out and testing to try to figure out where the borders of a property is, this goes much, much quicker than setting up the current way of working with for surveys by doing this in AR, connecting to a VMS service in the back that gives you very accurate data unrecorded, and then we can directly see the borders. You can even put up and say, one day, make a game out of this, want to figure out, have my neighbor stolen 2 centimeters of my property or not? Or do new things that we couldn't do before. For instance, reach areas you cannot reach. This you see an open trench where it was scanned while it was open and then closed, and of course you can't reach it afterwards. But what you do see here is something that we call the glassify effect. So we're actually extracting information from the video feed from the camera and use that as a layer going forward. So you really solve the parallax problem. I guess you've seen a number of solutions or demos where it seems like if you have data that is underground or partly overground, you will see that they fluctuate. You are not sure shit is it below or above ground. With using setting focus on these kind of elements, we make it much more understandable and adaptable for people to solve these kind of problems as well. Another sample is how do we use what we call intelligent cursors and understanding even on virtual elements in combination. So you can really see what areas and the surface orientation, you get that indication back from the cursor itself when you are working on things. So these are elements that we think is quite important going forward. So a lot of these kind of smaller things we have identified to really make sure that we can really deliver value on the workflows. Another area which we have tested and been working quite a lot with is simulations. So and relocalization. So this is a sample that we're seeing where we are doing what's called smart HVAC and ventilation systems to see how the airflow is actually functioning and how you could build going forward. So you have a combination of physical and virtual structures. But more interesting, I'll showcase something more coming shortly. Other areas where we've been working on understanding the value is that when you're looking at ground penetrating radars to really try to figure out and understand what's underground, we've been looking at how can we, for instance, use XR to simplify the scanning process, the relocalization when you go back into the field. How do you do the data overlay? Are there other elements, as you can see from the video, in terms of extracting how much material do we need to take out or fill, how big should the dig pit be, and so on. So there's a lot of things that we need to understand going forward. We're also looking at, and this is two interesting questions when you are doing experience simulations or trying to figure out, does it make sense to do it this way or not? What do we miss? So those two questions are also, I would say, fairly important in this element. But going to the real life, what does actually create? Where have we so far created real value with XR? We have a part of Hexagon called our Evolution, where we are working hard on a bigger structure in terms of technology that will help to do the green shift. What you do see here is from our solar power plant in Spain, where we are testing out a lot of Hexagon technologies and deploying. And then the target here, as you can see on screen, is to increase the efficiency of power plants with 30%. And that's a massive amount of energies. But in XR, we do the simulations there, and we are testing to see if it holds, how we can use the wind to clean the solar panels for dust. Because if they get dusty, you do have today, you're operating with either manual cleaning or robotics cleaning, and those are very expensive. Can we make sure that the panels stay cleaner longer time? Much, much better. But even better part is how do we link the adjustments of the solar panels up so that we can do the cooling by using the wind the best possible way while maintaining the highest efficiency of the solar panels. So these are what we call real values in this one. Another one, very also similar one, is what became very clear for us during COVID and the testing there, since we are one of the leading simulation companies. With the smart HVAC also, we're working with clean room laboratories to really test and set up to see, to make sure that you kept it clean and how does the actual workflow behave inside the clean laboratories. So what you see here is from the Grenoble clean laboratory in France. We've been doing the testing and getting all the different things coming out. This app was the first one that we actually released as an XR application, and that was done in November 21 actually. So version 2 is on its way out now. So as a result, I would say start thinking this way. So when you're going for valuable XR workflows, how can the superpowers of XR work for you in terms of teleportation, go to the future, go to the past, have the X-ray, and how can we explore alternative futures? So for us, the big question is, do they exist? There's a couple of other interesting questions I also like to think about, is that does the introduction of XR technologies or XR-enabled workflows create a shift? Will it be the same people that will be doing the purchasing decisions of XR workflows going forward? Who decides to change the workflows? Do we need to address those people, for instance? Another one is for us to really identify who are the people that can help us to drive the valuable XR use cases, or to identify those. As we say, how to bring the skills to the field. We need people that understands the pricing and the sales of that domain. They need to have the technical knowledge, and they also need to have kind of a domain expertise for us to change. And then what we call the educated questions. What does this extra information that we already have bring if we get it to the field and get it into the XR workflows? Another very interesting aspect is that when we're looking at are we developing for the right tools at the moment? It's the workflow, is it AR, VR, or MR enabled, or what is it? Or is it a combination? We are still at an early stage where we will have a lot of changes going on in terms of which is the best device for that job. So I think it's important to have in mind when you go forward, set the requirements also that we should be multi-platform in what we're doing. You should not be locked up to this device or that device, because that will change rapidly in the years to come. So that device type decision should be, call it multi-variants. And hopefully all of you online, that you will also be the change agents that everybody needs for us to go forward.